Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webcast, The AI-Enabled Law Department, AI, Specialization, and the Future of Legal Talent, brought to you by TruLegal and today's General Counsel. Before I kick off today's webinar, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items to ensure you make the most of your experience with us today. Please direct your attention to your console screen. We are happy to offer CLE credits for today's event. To receive credit, please be sure to fill out the survey and respond to the periodic pop-up check-ins. CLE is available for live attendees only and not on-demand viewers. We will apply for CLE credits to each state identified after the completion of the webinar to verify active participation. Certificates may take up to 4 to 6 weeks to be issued. We offer CLE credit in the following states: Arizona, California, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, North Carolina, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, and Wisconsin. The survey can be answered at any time during the presentation, or it will pop up at the end of the webinar. Be sure to respond to the pop-ups and survey, otherwise we won't have proof of your participation and won't be able to provide CLE credit. If you have pop-up blockers enabled, you may wish to disable them during the webinar. I'd also like to bring your attention to the related contact box at the bottom of your screen. From here, you can download today's slide presentation as well as content resources we think you'll find of interest. We encourage you to engage with our speakers. Please use the Q&A box, and your question will be addressed anonymously either during the presentation or at the end during our Q&A session. If your question is not addressed during today's live event, someone will follow up with you. If you have a technical or CLE-related question, please also use the Q&A box, and we will do our best to assist you. Lastly, please note this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers for today's webinar: Erika Fisher, Chief Legal Officer at HubSpot, Claire Hart, former COO of Groq and Blizzard Entertainment, and Jared Coseglia, founder and CEO of TruLegal, who will be moderating today's discussion. And now, Jared, I'll pass the mic to you.
All right, rock and roll. Well, we're really excited to be here with everybody today. If you're here to talk about AI in legal, specifically AI specialization as it relates to how leaders are approaching AI in legal, how in-house versus outside counsel is approaching AI when it comes to legal, how compensation is being affected as it relates to AI in legal, what's the difference between legal engineers and the jobs of the past and jobs of the future with AI. We're going to cover all this, guys, all of it. And we've got two of the brightest stars in our industry, chief legal officers from companies that we've all heard of, right? Blizzard Entertainment, Groq with a Q, and HubSpot. And I just want to take a minute and allow both of these esteemed guests of mine to introduce themselves before I set the stage for the conversation we're going to have for the next hour. So Claire, quickly tell us a little bit about who you are and why this topic is important to you and should be important to all of us.
Great, thanks, Jared. Yeah, so I'm Claire Hart. I'm a 3-time GC CLO of Groq, Blizzard, and a company called Genies. Before that, I grew up in-house, spending a decade at Google. But I started out as a litigator before that. So I, having most recently worked at an AI company, certainly have thought a lot about AI generally, but also wanting to be a good steward of the industry in which we operated, how that could impact the team that I built there. And so in addition to, using AI myself, thinking about building a team in AI, and I'm also interested in how this technology will impact our profession, how legal tech is growing, all of the things that are happening are interesting. And I think all of those will hopefully be things we touch on today.
So safe to say that being at an AI company, the top-down culture is to be AI enabled in the law department as much as anywhere else in the company. Yeah?
Yeah, I think a lot, not only, Groq is a semiconductor company, it also has a cloud platform with a lot of developers. And I think, I learned this early at Google. I think a lot of companies are this way, but really using your product is important in every department. And so really push to experiment and implement within the legal team as well as all the other teams.
We're going to dive deep. Erika Fisher from HubSpot, tell us a little bit about you and why this topic is important to you and should be to all of us.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erika. I'm currently Chief Legal Officer at HubSpot. I've been with the company for a little over a year, and prior to that, I was with a company called Atlassian, which makes developer tools, which, to Claire's point, you do not get away with operating in a developer tool company without figuring out how to be technical. And so held several operational roles there. And yeah, I think the AI transformation that's taking place across the industry is leaving no one behind or no one untouched. And I think this is an area where we are at an inflection point of what it's going to mean to be an in-house operator, something I'm super passionate about. And I'm super excited to have the conversation today. So let's kick it off.
Well, I think what's going to be fascinating is there are a lot of people out there that haven't really been forced or touched yet by AI integrating into their job as much as the leaders of the industry like yourselves, which is why you're here, have been. And so we're going to give them some guidance throughout this presentation on how they can start moving their departments, moving their programs, moving their businesses closer to being a more AI-enabled law department, whether they're a leader or an individual contributor. We're going to touch all of that. Let me set the stage for what we're going to talk about here today and cover a couple of things. I always think it's important to share with everybody where we're over here at True getting our data from. So we are going to take a look here. There we go. All right, we're live. This is where we get our data from. So if anybody's curious about, hey, when you show us things about salaries, this is where we're getting it from. These are the amount of applicants that we've seen come in. These are the amount of people we're presenting. We're getting it from LinkedIn Insights. We're having ongoing conversations with thousands of C-suite leaders, the likes of our esteemed guests here today. We produce job reporting on all sorts of different specialized verticals within the law department. If you want that information, it's available in that area that Lainey talked about at the beginning of this call to download for everybody for you right here and now. So let me set the stage here on why specialization matters and the areas of specialization we're going to break down. If you haven't read this article by Eric Dodson Greenberg, it's a great article. It's a little dated now, but it's sort of evergreen in my mind because it really sets the stage for this isn't just another tool in our toolbox, which I think so many of us initially thought, oh, okay, this is more in our arsenal in order to do our job as legal professionals better. It's much bigger than that, and we're going to explore the density of that reality. It's not just about a transition. Things are going to be fundamentally different, and we've already seen that in the job market from where we're sitting here at TruLegal. Even from January, February to March, April, the impact of demand for AI-related skills in all sorts of aspects of the law. So when we really break this down into 4 quadrants, which is how I think people should think about how this is going to have a ripple effect to their individual careers or their approach to hiring. First, the buying habits of corporate law departments are going to change, right? People are going to explore different partnerships with different outside counsel, with different service providers. We're in a renaissance of technology thanks to AI and legal. There are literally, we will show you, 1,000 companies out there with which to potentially procure technology and services from. There's going to be change in buying habits. Those buying habits are going to change the way law departments value software and services, which ultimately will change the way we evaluate talent. And what we're starting to see happen now at what was a 1-to-9 ratio is now a 1-to-5 ratio in terms of jobs that are requiring a density of AI skills related to performing the job in order to get hired. And that's increasing on a rapid scale. So the way I think of it is this, it's a funnel, right? And I'd love to hear Claire and Erika's take on this before we get into a little bit of their individual ethos. This is how we see the world, right? We've got AI, it comes in 3 years ago. It's exposing inefficiencies, whether it's billing, whether it's processes, whether it's time consumption. And now you've got law departments saying, do I want to build? Do I want to buy? And this is an important one. And actually, we're doing a whole webinar on this later, but we'll unpack it a little here. Building or buying is not the same decision chain that it used to be because AI has given us so much opportunity to choose between the two in ways that we couldn't before. outside counsel, we're seeing premium shifts and the relationship dynamic shifting between inside and outside counsel. That's leading to paying for value, not volume. And what does value mean? Well, that is the million-dollar question. And what we're seeing from where we're standing as it relates to talent, the value for in-house law departments is in 3 core verticals: cost reduction, faster actionable insights, and optimizing internal processes. And these are the sort of ethos, and you'll see when we talk about Erika and Claire's ethos, there are overlaps. But I'd love to hear sort of how you guys see this chain reaction happening in real time in your jobs, and what do you see coming? And then we'll get into exactly how Erika sort of breaks down how leaders should approach implementing these sorts of sea changes. Claire, I'll kick it to you first.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think across all of these pieces, right? And I think at the outset, it's important to make clear, and like I said, I grew up within the Google legal department, which I think is about 1,200 folks now. That's very unusual, right? And there are many, many very small law departments, many large ones, many companies without, a lawyer. Maybe they have one. And so I think for each company, each person, this is going to be a little bit different. So I want to just say from the outset, like most recently, my teams have been, 10 to 40, something in that range, not enormous. And I started my last team kind of from scratch. And so I think, depending on where you're at, you probably have a different answer to all of these pieces. For sure, I think a lot about outside counsel, how we're engaging with them, who we're engaging with, and how we are presenting projects and how we're asking about billing, all of those things. But even just simply just asking, how are you using AI, and how are we being charged for that, and how are you training your associates, and how are they using it, is really important. And then I think really thinking about how is each person on the team, and it's, if you're building the team, you can really do this from scratch, which is awesome, right? To say, what are the tasks that I really need a human in here to do? What tools are they going to need to be successful? How are we going to build a structure around them? And how are we going to add folks as we grow to enable the tools that we're building? So really thinking flexibly as you go. And I think for each person, like I said, this looks a little bit different depending on the size of your team and the stage that you're at.
Yeah, and we always talk about build or buy, and we think technology. But build or buy relates to staffing and talent too. And what an interesting perspective that you got to essentially buy your whole team, right, from the outside in. I believe it was a little different when you inherited a team, Erika, at HubSpot. Tell us a little bit how this relates to your experience. And we're going to get into very specific questions that Claire's already articulated as it relates to outside counsel being questioned on AI from their clients.
Sure. So my legal team at HubSpot is about 65 people. We've actually sort of reshaped that and decreased it over time. When I first came in, I think we were slightly above 75 or so. And it, at the time, actually was not, I know there's a lot of talk right now about headcount and layoffs. And this happened organically as we looked at our processes, and we just had natural attrition. And then we said, okay, we don't need to backfill that role. And I just want to, maybe come back to the slide that Jared's sharing, which is the legal job market is being rewired. But keeping in mind that is a sort of downstream effect of the entire sort of macroeconomic environment is being rewired. And you see tech companies leading this, but it is percolating to other industries as well. And, for a very long time, growth at all costs was rewarded. And now we're seeing just a structural shift in the value of operational efficiency and operational scale. And so that means that at the individual level, that is a skill set and a perspective that will be rewarded, that has actually a monetary value. And so I think that's just something to sort of internalize, and also think about when you're thinking about the leaders that you are working for or applying to work for, and what the CEOs are thinking about, because that's the sort of input that they're getting from investors and customers, et cetera. And so all of that relates because we're customers of outside counsel firms, and we didn't really have a real conversation about rate efficiency or billing efficiency or anything like that. And in the past, may have been discussed of like, wow, my bill's really big, why? But now there's a true expectation of like, what are you doing to return more operational value into the system? So I think that's super important. I will say, just like everything in the market right now, I was with a group of peers the other day, and we were introducing ourselves around a table, and everyone was sort of like, saying the company that they work for, and they're like, wait, I have to say AI first or agentic, before my company thing, because the valuation goes up. And it's sort of like, it's ridiculous, but it's also true that, if you can think about how do I reshape my skill set so that I can really declare that I am AI first or AI native, your value goes up, whether you're an individual or a vendor or an operational team. And so that's just kind of the reality of where we are today. And Jared, happy to get into details about what we've done as a team.
Oh, we're going to get into those details right now. So, my ethos is cost reduction, faster actionable insights, and optimizing internal processes. But Erika, whose ethos you should probably listen to first and foremost, and then Claire's, is a little different. And I've sort of compartmentalized this as AI specialization in leadership, because what I think is amazing about our two speakers today is they're doing it. And you guys can all learn from them in terms of how they've approached not just layering AI in as another tool, but rethinking and restructuring the entire approach to running a law department. So let's break that down into what Erika really defined as three core sort of pillars, I guess, of thinking or reshaping your thinking about approaching law department leadership in the era of AI. Take it away.
Sure. So, when we first went about this, I think like everybody as a team, we were driving the principle of, okay, everyone has to be using AI. Everyone has to, think about like, are they using ChatGPT? Like, what's going to be your tool of choice? And that's great to get a team kickstarted. But what it can mean is you have really high spike on individual productivity, right? Everyone's better at drafting. All of your emails are much better constructed. They may have a few more M dashes, but like everybody's much clearer on what the bullet points are. And that's great for a first pass. But when you start to really think about how do we deliver outcomes to the business or clear measurable impact that matters at the business level, how do we accelerate and sort of activate the team level productivity? And that's a different question, because dropping tech into a set of talent capabilities and or processes that aren't optimized to absorb it is not going to magically sort of transform your team into an AI first team. And so what we started with is we said, okay, what is the nature of the things that our team is doing? How are they spending their time? And can we bucket those in an organized way that helps us identify opportunities, both in terms of what is ripe for a change in process, and then is there a tool that matches that process that can be accelerated by AI? And sometimes tool is just a workflow automation, sometimes it's a legal specific vertical tool. And where that led us is to deflection, automation, and enablement. And so deflection is areas of opportunity where we said, attorneys are reviewing these things or they're answering questions, but the pattern matching is so consistent that we think that from a risk perspective, a machine could actually do this. And so some of those things are, low risk NDAs, or they may be employee questions that we get repeatedly that the answer is not going to change. And so we identified areas where that's the opportunity, we can deflect it, and actually a lawyer never has to touch those things, or maybe somebody's auditing that system on a regular basis to make sure that it's being fine-tuned and catching any errors. The second bucket is automation, which means it needs to come to a lawyer, but there's a big part of the lift that we can actually do to automate the process before it gets to the lawyer. And a classic example of that is what you see dozens of tools on the market right now, redlining contracts, right? So taking in the contract, scanning it against a playbook first, having AI that's good enough and trained enough on that to do the first, second, or third pass, and then passing it to the lawyer for final tweaking or approval. So that was a huge, sort of surface area for us to tackle as well. And then the third is enablement. And we said, like, some things aren't totally ripe to sort of be handled almost entirely end to end by a machine, but we can get the lawyer enabled, a fair bit of the way. And an example of this is we, as a 8,000 person company, receive now and again demand letters from either current or former employees. And there's a big lift that a team has to do, typically of humans, to reconcile the facts, like what is this person saying happened? What does our employee relations file say happened? Sort of match the facts, identify where there's gaps, and then run that against case law to say, like, what would our position be here? What do we think the legally legitimate claims are? What do we think our legally legitimate defenses are? We have now AI enabled all of that so that a lawyer is coming to that as though a junior team member has sort of compiled all the work, put the building block pieces together, and then they're leaning into, okay, it's not a playbook, right? But they're leaning into starting with their legal brain of saying, is this the right case law? Is this the right approach strategically? How do I think about this against our precedent that we've done internally? So identifying those opportunity areas and getting the team to break their processes is the first layer, and then saying, okay, what tool do we need to put against this? And that's helped us to identify where are we sort of good enough and an LLM or a generative AI tool is sufficient. And sometimes that's efficient because people are spending that time in that operating system and it's a switching cost to go elsewhere, versus what are the use cases where we really do need a vertical specific tool because the LLM models hallucinate and we need a deterministic model that doesn't hallucinate with case law or doesn't hallucinate with litigation citations. So that's how we've approached our surface area to date.
I want to get Claire's take on this too, but I just want to draw attention to a couple of things you said that I think will really resonate with a lot of our listeners. The first is you keep referring to these as opportunities. And I think that this is demonstrable of why you're so progressive in the position you're and why you're here and speaking, because I think most people talk about it like risk. And the problem with risk is that it doesn't get you the same level of buy-in from the top down that opportunity identification does. And I'd love to hear you just comment on that before I turn to Claire for her sort of take on all of this. And then we're going to add a fourth pillar that comes from Claire.
Yeah, I think, legal teams often, the word strategy can be a little bit of an unfamiliar term. The business has a strategy, do you have a legal strategy? And all strategy is for a business or a business unit is looking at where are my opportunities to be better? Where are my opportunities to deliver more value? And I think an easy one, just to start from if you're going to build a legal strategy for your team, you can just start with, there is a rising expectation right now that work and workflows get turned faster. So if you just start with that dimension of velocity is not going away. And so if you were to say, what are the opportunity areas for us to work faster? Not faster chaotically and with a whole bunch of risk attached, but you are almost certainly bound to find areas that you can work faster. And I think if you apply that through the lens of not just individuals, right? I can answer emails faster, or I can, turn my drafts faster. But if you do it through the lens of a team, so what is our service level agreement? Can we make that faster? What is our turnaround time for answering tickets that come in? Can we make that faster? It's not meant to say that everybody has to be sprinting at, a 12% incline and 12%, speed all the time. But that alone is a very clear opportunity. And there's probably more within your business, but if you just start with that and deliver that value, I think you're going to return a ton of value to the business overall.
Claire, tell us your riff on all this.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of this. And I think I especially love the idea of speaking of opportunity and not always coming from risk, which I think is what's expected of us. I think the thing that I would add on top is embracing experimentation, trying things and then deprecating them if they don't work, championing the things that do. And doing that, obviously you have to really think about, you don't want to whiplash everyone all the time, but I think people are often afraid because they know sort of legal tech in the past and how much implementation does that take and how much does it disrupt your actual workload. And the great thing about a lot of what we now have access to through AI is that you can quickly kind of spin up a new process or a new something and see if it's working. And I think one thing I really like to do is identify folks within my colleagues of other departments who like to experiment, who want to give feedback, who are first users, and work with those teams and identify something that you think you can easily just try. And then if it works for them, they can be your champions and kind of rolling it out more broadly. So I think, living in the spirit of not everything has to be such a big decision. Not everything has to be such a big, overhaul. It can be really small things that you do that are quite impactful, and then you can learn from there. And if it doesn't work, shift it and do something else.
It's fascinating to me. I've been staffing for almost 27 years in legal, and I don't think experimentation has ever made the top 3 desirable requirements for attorneys in the space. And yet it is coming up again and again with everybody I talk to that is in a position like yours. I want to add the 4th pillar here, not just 3, but 4th, because we can't ignore this 4th one, and Claire wouldn't let us ignore it on our prep call. So it's the one that for a lot of people things start from as it relates to AI implementation. And Claire, I just want you to comment on that. And then we're going to come back to experimentation as it relates to specialization within legal engineers, which is what's next. But tell us, cost reduction, why is it a pillar? How should people approach it? Why is it a point of entry for so many people? And how can they start using AI to get them leverage there?
Yeah, and something that Erika said sort of made me think about, I think, what's important for legal leaders, I think, is to really think of yourself as a P&L owner, and to think about, how you think about your budget and what you're spending on and what is the impact of that. And I had an interesting conversation last week with a outside counsel who said, I keep trying to pitch these flat fee arrangements and lawyers don't take me up on it, which was flabbergasting to me, because my experience is if you really understand what you think the work is going to be, a flat fee often is better, cheaper. This person works at a very expensive law firm. And so I asked her, why do you think that people are saying no to that? And she said, and as we were kind of talking about it, I think people don't understand what the work actually is and how long it's going to take. And therefore they're afraid they're going to pay more than less. And so I think really, really understanding your budget is like number one thing. And then identifying places where you feel like it's out of whack with what the value is, and really go to your outside counsel. I always ask, give me a budget, give me an estimation of hours. Can we do an alternative fee arrangement? When folks on my team are getting that, kind of thing. And I think you're also think about that when it comes to, the software and the tools that you're licensing, right? Like, I think some folks get really excited about the idea of like a multi-year discount. Well, things are moving really fast. You're now stuck with something that probably may not be what you need. And so I think really thinking about it holistically is really important, and looking for areas. I think so many legal leaders are being pushed on the cost of their departments. And I think that's totally fair, because legal is very expensive. And honestly, the business decides how much it wants to spend on legal. So I think if you're a good steward of your budget, if you really understand it, if you're pushing to really reevaluate the things that you're using and not using and how much you're spending here and there, then I think then you're being a good leader. You're going to have a lot of friends in your executive team, including your CFO. And I think your team will appreciate that you're being thoughtful about your resources.
And allow you to experiment more, right? I mean, that's part of it. It's a chain reaction, but it also has a chain reaction in terms of the kind of talent that we wind up acquiring as a result of this kind of reorganization of thought. It's perfect because you guys have already touched on all of this. We sort of broke down, where did corporate law department AI specialization begin? And these are the buckets that we've seen the most, I don't want to say commoditization, but I would say demand and big synchronization with legal operations and attorneys who are really wielding these tools. This is also where we've seen the most proliferation of AI technology hitting the market in order to corner it before it comes commoditized and before there's the great roll up of all the companies into 3 or 4 that sort of dominate that space. So if you're someone that's doing e-billing, spend analytics, contract lifecycle management, contract analytics, reporting and dashboarding, Tableau, Power BI, all of that kind of work, and now moving into the Microsoft suite, and we'll get into some of those tools in a second, this is in high demand right now, and this is where we see the most amount of law departments saying we're going to implement AI to have an immediate impact on the business. This is what we see coming next. And I'd be curious to see what you both feel is right about these or wrong about these, and why, and maybe what's missing on this list or reinforced on this list in terms of areas of specialization where AI may be more forcefully or more urgently demanded of the talent that is in these legal verticals because of the opportunity to reduce cost or create automation or create deflection, et cetera. Erika, why don't we start with you?
Sure. It's interesting because I think there's sort of I happen to work for a SaaS company, and if any of you read the news, you've probably heard the word SaaSpocalypse, where there's any number of versions of theories about what's going to happen to SaaS. And we're seeing this sifting now, even with our investors, where like everything's not being treated as one big bucket. Like there's nuance in what application layers are going to continue to add value and which ones will be sort of disintermediated by LLMs. And I think there's something similar in the legal tech vertical that's happening, where we're starting to understand like where is there enough depth and rigor, whether it's permissioning, compliance, whatever else, that we need a legal specific tool versus what can be handled by sort of more generic workflow automation. So I think that's just something that like just to accept that that's going to continue to evolve, and this is a moving target as the models get better and better. I would say, I think both of these buckets are true. And I definitely like, even within my own team, the low hanging fruit tends to be right now around contract lifecycle management, contract analytics. I will say, just taking a step back and framing it in terms of opportunities, I like to always reorient my team to what does HubSpot have to be awesome at in the next, let's call it 2 years. It feels like the time horizons are getting shorter and shorter because the strategic roadmaps are changing faster. What does the company have to be awesome at in the next 2 years? And therefore, what does the legal team have to be awesome at to accelerate the growth of the business? And if you put it through that lens, for us, we are dispersing ourselves against a wider and wider customer base. We have more need for strategic account support upmarket. And so therefore, leaning into how do we accelerate and enable our commercial attorneys so that they can redeploy their high value add to our strategic accounts is top of mind. So I think some of this is going to be consistent across the industry, but if you're putting it through the lens of what are the strategic opportunities where tech is really going to help me accelerate the business goals, that's the first place I would start. The second to your question, Jared, about what's not on here, I think one of the big places to crack right now is intake. And the interesting thing is that software kind of resulted in this proliferation of applications, and we all got really used to switching around to different applications and having intake in different areas. And we personally have lawyers that are engaging with the business on intake through Slack, and then we have others who are very disciplined about their ServiceNow tickets, and then others have email going back and forth. And that's just kind of the nature of where we find ourselves as a team. You would be tackling this in a different way if you were founding a new team, like maybe Claire was in one of her examples. But I think the intake piece in and of itself is an area that's maybe not on this list that's huge, because there is increasing expectation from your customers, both internal and external, that things are fast, easy, simple, and there's one point of contact. And then how do you build that and then route it and enable the team in a way that really unlocks their potential?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm gonna get Claire because I see you nodding too. We see it. This data cleaning, data stewardship. We see a lot of people leaning on their IT departments for talent to do that because legal doesn't necessarily get independent exclusive budget for people to clean their data and doesn't necessarily want to outsource that work because it can be quite expensive. Claire, what's your take on all this and comment on data intake for us?
Yeah, I feel like the legal front door is the holy grail no one has yet perfectly unlocked. So everyone wants that. But I also would take it maybe a couple steps further to the places that I really think about it, which is not only is that great because, it's simple for the client, that you're the colleague that you're working with, and it, makes everything sort of more efficient, but it also can be a source of, like you said, a lot of data about what are the kinds of things that are coming in, who is it coming from. The other thing I think we haven't really touched on that I think it can really lead to, and I think this is something that's probably not on your list and that needs to be on your list, is what is the consistent sort of risk, sort of central risk profile across different decision-making that you're making. I think legal has been a very relational type of a role. And I think that many of us, me 1000% included, love that piece of it. But that also leads to a lot of different types of outcomes and different risk profiles and different answers. And that can be really frustrating to our colleagues who got an answer. And sometimes they purposefully, obviously, go look for answers from their favorite person who they think is going to be most lenient. But sometimes we just don't talk to each other enough, or we don't have enough data from each other. And this is particularly true with the overturn in legal departments that I think, is faster now than you have seen maybe in the past. So also really thinking about that intake and the data as a way to sort of manage consistency across your legal decision-making, consistency in your risk profile. And that is like a huge unlock that I think we haven't had before, that we really need to be thinking about in terms of how we're building things out. And also that sort of, I think of it as like the historian for the team, which should be living somewhere and not in a person's brain. And often that's where it sits. But we should really be thinking about how we're going to leverage that.
Oh my gosh, Claire. You're so right. And yes, we need to. And I actually think it is on the list. What you've just described to me is what I would call AI governance operations, right?
Okay.
Where companies are centralizing, here's what tools are available, here's what you can use those tools for, here's where outside counsel can come for permission for those tools, here's all of our compliance obligations, you can run it all and automate it all. We won't get into that now. It's a product called Andorra that we built, but that's for another conversation on another day. Let's talk a little bit about legal engineering, because I know there are legal engineers on this call who very much want to hear about the difference in specialization between legal engineers in-house and legal engineers in outside counsel. And even in our prep calls for this, we found there to be great diversity. So we actually let AI do some work for us in preparation for this and ran an analysis on jobs, hundreds and hundreds of jobs, that we pulled over a 6-month trailing that came from in-house law departments for legal AI engineers. And this is the word cloud that we got. And you can see here experimentation, right? Experimentation is on there. We've got data-driven insights is big, intelligent automation, operational excellence, governance. You do see a few products on here, but not like you're about to see when I show you just how many AI products are available in the marketplace. Before I let you guys comment, I'm gonna go ahead and show everybody the outside counsel word cloud. So we did the same thing, took about, there were fewer jobs here, but we took a similar corpus of jobs. And this is the word cloud we got. And you see, we're calling these builders, right? If we go back to this word cloud here, you can see we're calling this the operators. I didn't come up with that, my AI did, but it does sort of make sense. And you'll see why. So when we look at outside counsel, I mean, wow, what a completely different set of skill set requirements, desired experiences, technology specific requirements, very, very different. Let's start with you, Erika. Tell me what you think all this means, and what do you think the difference is between legal AI engineers in-house versus outside counsel?
Yeah, this is fascinating to me, because I am actually working on a job description for a hire on my team, and the job description actually looks a lot more like the builders. And I'm sort of wondering, why is that? And I wonder if maybe a couple of things. One, outside counsel law firms have a much more complex customer interface, and they have a high bar for trust within that. And so somebody who is really going to understand the data flows and be able to customize builds makes a lot of sense. There's probably going to be a lot more resistance to just, trying things on for size, or experimenting, or vibe coding things, and, seeing if the POC works. I think maybe the other piece is in-house, and I'm curious, Jared, if there's any, double click on the survey, but you tend to have tech partners in-house that you can lean on. And I certainly know, there's, sort of a spectrum of this, but I have some great business solutions architects that I can pull into my problem space. And so it really becomes more about do you deeply understand how our team operates, and sort of decomposing those workflows. And then you tell me what tech applies to it, or you tell me what, how our data should be architected, et cetera. So I think in some cases, outside counsel, you're solving for the lack of maybe a centralized IT department, or that person is playing that role within outside counsel. With that said, I predict that that these descriptions are going to collapse and lean in favor of this more technical description, just because, one, you need that bleeding edge expertise. I mean, I know Claire, I'm sure, would say the same. I get inundated with legal tech vendor requests every single day, and parsing through what is and what isn't, worthy of like me dropping it into our environment is beyond my skill set right now. And two, I actually want somebody who's going to sort of be a coach to our team, to demystify this, to help, train them up, come along, because there's a real adoption gap. It's not enough just to kind of architect the right solutions and have the right roadmap, but you have the people that have to come along the journey with you as well. And I think having somebody who's, more in this category of really the light leading the way is not only a great investment in your department, but it's a great investment in your talent as well. I'm going to frame it. I agree with everything you said. Let me frame it how we see it from the staffing perspective, which is exactly what you said. In some law firms, and for a lot of them, it's both, right? They've got so much customization that they kind of accelerated the need for somebody to be able to execute on that. But in the same token, and this is where they're different than in-house law departments, and it's important for people who are engineers to listen to, because it's a very different job potentially. They're focused on looking for the silver bullet that's the product that they can productize to roll out to all the customers or a large corpus of them, right? Who are, and where we're seeing jobs that lead to this are actually not at the really big firms. They're actually at more mid-sized firms where they have a very targeted client base, financial banking brokerage, and we're building certain things with AI that we're going to be able to productize and roll out to a variety of our customers, sort of the opposite of what you just described. But then both are true at the same time, sometimes within the same organization, but bifurcated sometimes as well. I also agree with you. This is where we're all headed. So if you're looking, people who are in legal, some of these are like hardcore programmer skills, but not all of them. And there's an opportunity for people to move from being a legal technology specialist to becoming an engineer in the era of AI and competing for jobs that are titled engineer or data scientist in the era of AI, because sometimes when they're called that, they're really not that at the end of the day. Claire, what is your take on all this?
I mean, I have a million thoughts. I think, again, like thinking about team size, a stage of company, speed of company is really important here. Like, I look at this, I'm surprised actually that these are mid-sized firms, because I would have expected them to be larger firms with these postings. And I would have been thinking about it more towards cost optimization, but maybe that's because I think about that a lot. I think, maybe a slightly different take. I agree with all of that. That certainly makes a ton of sense. I also actually think that for everyone who's paranoid that their job is going away, because I forget what it's 5 years, I think, when we won't need lawyers anymore. I don't believe that at all. But I think a way to differentiate yourself as a legal professional, whether you're in legal ops or you're a lawyer or something else, is to become really comfortable with these types of technologies. And I think, if you work at a great company and you're building a team and you have your pick of talent, which I was fortunate to have, I was looking for people who really felt comfortable, again, with that kind of experimentation, comfortable with trying things. And on my team, lots of people were doing different things that worked for their particular way that they like to work. And we could all sort of tie into sort of central pieces, as opposed to centralizing and then pulling it out the other way. And so I don't think there's a one size fits all solution here. I think, again, you have to really, to Erika's point, what is the thing that you're trying to achieve on your team over whatever your time frame is? I tend to look at 6 months, because the companies I've worked at have tended to work in that kind of a speed and time frame. And I've always, even before AI, looked at my team and its workloads and the distribution of work every 6 months. And I think maybe even have to pull that in more. But the ideal legal team to me, and an ideal hire to me, is someone who's also talking about this, and that's just a side of their job. It's augmenting their job. And so I think it's a combination of both specialized folks within the team, but also everyone figuring out how to embrace and optimize their own job with the tools and the processes that are available to them. Those people are going to stand out. And I know from folks I know who are interviewing, those questions are being asked in every interview. How are you utilizing AI? What are the things that have been successful? What are you trying? What tools do you like to use? And if you don't have an answer to that because you've relied on a central person on your team, I think you're just a less interesting hire as we think about moving forward.
Let's just jump ahead to that right now, since you've sort of set the stage for it. We do have some very specific things here, and these are great takeaways for everybody that's listening in. This is what candidates who are AI enabled are asking people on interviews. Do you have a defined AI strategy? Where are you investing in training? Is experimentation encouraged? Is it considered a waste of time? Who owns AI internally? And what we're finding is a lot of customers don't have really clear, or maybe more importantly, really consistent answers to these questions across multiple interviewers that are part of the interview process when looking to acquire AI-enabled talent. And I'm telling you right now, this will undo you as a hiring authority, because these candidates know they are in high demand. I agree with you, Claire. This is how you stand out today. But let's talk again in 6 months. Let's talk again in another 24, and it's no longer standing out. It's table stakes. You're right. The jobs aren't going away. We're busier than we've ever been in my organization. There's so many jobs, but the skill sets are changing. And if you are not figuring out a way to begin talking intelligently about how you're incorporating AI, if not into your job, certainly into your life, it is going to become increasingly more difficult to get the attention of hiring managers who are trying to build AI-enabled departments, which ultimately is going to be everyone. I want to be mindful of the time because we only have a little bit. I think it's important to see a couple redirections for hiring managers who wind up interviewing people on what we call ambition and aptitude, right? I want someone who's hungry. I think they can do it. I'm looking to hire on character and integrity and not necessarily on previous experience. We've been giving our customers these redirects as a way to engage those job seekers. And if they can't answer these questions, they're probably not the right candidate to invest in when you're looking for an investment hire versus a experienced hire. Before we get into guidance, I want to go back and talk about something that I think is really important that Erika, you touched on already, but I want it to be, I want it to go a few layers deeper, which is this idea of industrial versus individual change for both leaders and those who are individuals that are part of the industrial change, right? This is the slide I mentioned earlier of like, this is just how many companies are out there doing AI right now, right? It's crazy. You can't even read them all. It's an illegible slide. But it's a really great way to show you, yeah, these companies are out there. This is how much opportunity is out there, but it's also a great way to show you there'll be tremendous consolidation. When we were talking, we sort of touched upon a few of these pillars. I'm curious, and we're coming up, we've got about 5 or 7 more minutes to touch upon a few things. What stands out to you here, Erika, as really driving home the difference between industrial and individual change, and why is making that distinction in terms of your agendas important as a law department leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important because there's real demands being placed upon, as Claire astutely said, on P&L owners. So it is, there is real pressure to say, how are you returning value to the organization with the headcount that you have? And is there a more efficient way to do that? So that is just the world that we are in. That does not mean at every company that you're slashing headcount by 50%, but it means you need to have a demonstrable plan for how are you, sort of having a point of view on how much headcount in the future should be needed to run the value you provide to the business versus where can tech be deployed to enable that value better. So I think that's a real bill that's coming, and leaders should be aware of it. If I rewind even 12 months, as a company and at a team level, we were really interested in measuring, are people using AI? And that was sufficient. And I think we all understood that's an input, it's not an outcome. And eventually we would be held to what is the outcome that we're providing. And so we have a couple metrics that we put against things, obviously efficiency on how many people how many lawyers does it take to do this task? But we also measure things like CSAT, accuracy, velocity, so that we're balancing the quality factor overall. But I think what that looks like is if you don't have a plan against an opportunity area that looks like, what is the existing process? What needs to change about that process in order for technology to work better within it? What are the capabilities that you need within the team to drive that change management? And then what is the technology that's fit for purpose for that? And that can be an iterative cycle. To Claire's point, like sometimes you start out experimenting in a sandbox and getting comfortable with the data, and does the team have it? And you then like right size the plan against that. Maybe the team really needs to be upskilled, and that's your biggest gap. And actually the process and everything else is fine. But that's generally the approach that I'm looking for when I say, are we on the path to optimize for team or industrial productivity, or are we just doubling down on individual productivity at this point?
I love what you said, and I'll flip the script and make it everything you just said about analyzing your team is what I'm encouraging job seekers to start doing about their individual careers. Where is that opportunity? What technology should I be learning to enhance the skill set that's going to take me to what this next level job description is? Because I can tell you, we do the same thing with candidates. Candidates come to us and they're like, here's the roadmap I've built. I haven't executed on it yet, but I know this is the roadmap, and we'll invest in representing those candidates 10 times out of 10, right? The people who are come to us and have no idea and haven't done the research and haven't looked inward in order to how to impact the business outward are the ones that they require a lot more coaching, right? And you've got to get willpower and desire and ambition, and resistance has got to kind of get out of the way of opportunity. I want to go quickly to this because I promised we would do it. There is a difference happening between how AI is impacting legal ops versus lawyers. And without going terribly deep here, I want to share with everybody some financial statistics. So in 2025, we did an analysis on all professionals we place, lawyers, non-lawyers, separating out who was AI enabled, where the job was more than 50% AI focused. And what we found was those that were not, where the job was very traditional, were getting about an 8% increase at the point of hire in 2025. Those that were AI enabled were getting almost double that, almost a 15% average increase. So you could see that the market is starting to separate. But you could also see here, because the average is 10, that a lot more people moved that job at 8% than they did at 15. So there were fewer people moving jobs in that AI-enabled capacity. But as I said earlier on this call, the amount of job orders we were getting were a 1-to-9 ratio in terms of AI enablement desired skill sets. Now it's 1-to-5. At the end of this year, it'll be 2-to-1. That's my guess in terms of outbound hiring. When we look at legal ops in particular in terms of salaries, this is 2025 up here, and everybody's got copies of these slides. So I'll just show you, and it's mostly good news. Whoops. You could see here just how much salaries have increased, mainly at the leadership level, which makes sense because this is where change has to start and where demand for people with experiences like Erika and Claire's lie. And so salaries are increasing at that level. This was our overlap, and I'd love to use this as sort of our wrap up of comments from our wonderful speakers before we take a few questions. We tried to break into some skill sets that we thought would be good for legal ops and lawyers to see and where the overlap was. Claire, let's start with you. Anything here that's missing, or anything here you want to highlight as being really important for someone generally on a legal ops team or as a lawyer or both to be focused on as they develop themselves professionally over the next 6 months?
I mean, my answer is not AI specific, but I see something here that has always been a part of my hiring rubric, and that is curiosity. And I saw it also on your word bubble. So there are 3 things that I hire for, regardless of the level, regardless of whether it's a lawyer or a legal ops professional or a contracts manager or whoever, which is number 1, curiosity. Number 2 is like a demonstrated interest and ability to grow, because I tend to work in tech companies that work really fast, and you have to be able to keep up or even outpace it. And the third is what I call a servant mindset. I think this is a service profession. When my team got together for the first time at my last company, and we did just an icebreaker of what was your first job, every single person on the team had like a hospitality or a food service or some sort of service-oriented job as their very first job. And it showed, I think, in both like why I hired them and how they showed up, and something I get a lot of feedback from my colleagues about in terms of how my team operates. And I think we haven't really touched on it, but a lot of people are talking about the importance of soft skills in an age of AI, which I think is a little bit counter also to some of the things we've talked about. But, the way that you're not going to disappear as a dinosaur is both being AI enabled and also being a really good person on the soft skill pieces that AI is not going to catch up to, at least not for a while. And so that middle bullet there is something that I think about, have always thought about, and I think it's particularly important because things are moving really quickly now with a lot of AI-enabled workflows.
Erika, any thoughts you want to add to this? Anything we're missing here that you want to highlight as being important for folks to think about in terms of professional development?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Claire's last comment there around the soft skills. And I think we had a question that came through on this even. There's a big difference between being able to deliver the right answer, whether it's a legal right answer or whether this is the right process or the right tool for the KPI that we are aiming for, whether it's efficiency or velocity or something else. It is that is like one piece of the equation. Having the skills to walk people through the change management or influence them to the conclusion that this is the right answer about something is a whole different skill set that humans happen to be very good at and AI is not always good at. And so I think incorporating that into your explanation of the how, it's equally important to demonstrate you have the technical skill set, but I think I would really also be looking for somebody who acknowledges, and we're bringing humans along this journey at a time that can be very anxiety inducing. And here's how I find it effective to do that. Or here's some of the tips and tricks I've learned along the way to, sort of make this a coalition of the willing rather than a coalition of the fearful. And so I think that's something that is really important to acknowledge, and this person should equally bring to the table.
Well, as you can see, it magically appeared in our top 10 bits of guidance that will accompany this deck for anyone who wants to take it home with them. It made it in there, right? Become adept at articulating why things should be used. Should be used, right? Not can, but should, and being able to help perform the judgment, which, as you eloquently said, is what AI can't do. We're going to take some questions now. We're ready for Q&A. You guys can all take a look at the guidance, the 10 guidances in the deck at a separate time. This is a question, and I'm flattered he's even on the call, from one of the very few people in my life that I can call a mentor. So thanks for joining, Bob. I'm flattered. Here's the question. Opportunities and optimization are clearly the right priorities to bring value back to the organization. As a collection of individuals who each brings hopes and fears to their participation, how are you tending to the individual mindsets as they navigate the fear of being optimized out of the business?
I'm happy to take this one. Yeah, I mean, I think I have I've had smaller teams more recently, so it's easier, when you have a smaller team. I think really getting to understand what are the pain points for this person, what do they love about their job, what do they not love about their job, and what are the ways in which they're thinking, maybe they're not thinking about ways they can utilize some of the tools and processes that are either central to the team or that they themselves could have access to. My goal is always to make people love their job more. And I think if you're in that mindset, then hopefully you're not sitting in the fear space. You're sort of demonstrating that you're thinking about their growth and potential. And that's part of sort of the analysis that I do when I meet with my directs or my skip levels, and we have conversations routinely on career. Some of it is around those questions, which I then bring into the day-to-day to make sure that we're addressing some of those issues. And I think, again, like if you're hiring, you're hiring for people who are, at least I am, more optimistic than pessimistic about this, then I think that helps as well. If you're finding yourself in a really pessimistic place, I think maybe try to do some experimentation or some thought, like you said, around, what are the things I love about my job? What are the things I wish I could automate? And start there.
I'm going to turn this next one over to Erika, even though it was inspired by something that Claire said. Claire mentioned she reviews her team's workload every 6 months. How often do you really review your team's workload, and how do you define a reasonable workload in the era of AI?
Oh, it's a great question. And I'm not sure. I think Claire's, sort of like framing of you are responsible for load balancing your team and understanding that. I mean, right now, I am just assuming there is outsized efficiency to be gained than like we can even see. And so, the idea of like having an opinion on that and for me to stand up to my team and say like, this is exactly where it should be ratios wise is sort of disingenuous, because the technology is pacing at such a pace that like what is a good target around efficiency or velocity changes within 6 months time. And so I think maybe perhaps a more authentic way to lead for your team is to say, we don't know where the ceiling on this whole thing is. If you were to believe those who are pushing the AI, we would, the ceiling is robots run the world and humans are, having a 3-day work week and the rest is history. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. And so I think if you approach it as we are on a very steep change curve right now, we are at the very early innings of a technology transformation. And therefore, as long as we are seeking to get up that change curve at some rate or pace, that's where we should be focusing. And so, you can measure the returns on efficiency. We try to seek to put specific KPIs in place around lawyer to deal ratio. What is our SLA? Like, I really push my team on what is the measurable impact that you can return from deploying this thing that you think is going to return value. I'm happy with the incremental return on those metrics getting better over time. I don't think, for me, it is not genuine or authentic for me to proclaim that I know what the destination is at this point. And so I think that's a little bit of a different way to lead through this, is, to pull your team along the skill set adoption. But it is, the destination is not terminally known at this point.
I believe.
And maybe just to allay the fears. Maybe just to allay the fears that Bob was representing,
right? Sorry, I was going to try to end us on a joke, Claire. Go ahead.
So I want to address the fear that I think may be resonating off of my comment about addressing workload. It's not with efficiency in mind, actually. It's more in terms of, like, where is the growth? What have you outgrown? What do you want to learn? How do you load balance across the team for opportunity and growth? And also, where are we finding just a huge growth? And then how do we address it? Is it through some sort of process or optimization? Is it because we need a new hire? It just, I think for sure there's always a little bit of an efficiency view in that, but it is not, that is not the spirit 100% of which I go into those conversations. And it is really more towards on my team, of the resources we've been given, of the problem sets we're being asked to solve. And I think you have to look at that all the time. And I think actually the 6 months is an old maybe time frame that should be brought in, just to ensure that we're being good stewards of our people and our resources.
I can't thank both of you enough for being such amazing stewards of knowledge and experience to all of our listeners. I know you guys are on the tip of the spear when it comes to this stuff, and it's often difficult to turn a lot of that knowledge into practical advice that our peers in the industry can take away. And you've done so beautifully on this call. So thank you so much for giving us not just wisdom, but tactical advice that we can take away from us. We're going to do this again in the fall, and we're going to talk about build or buy. These will be my special guests who are deeply involved in building and buying technology in law departments. Join us then. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with True. We've got lots more data to share with you. We are out of time. Thank you to Claire. Thank you to Erika. Thank you to Lainey and today's general counsel. Make sure you get your CLE credits and download all the wonderful documentation that's available to you from this webinar, and tell your friends that they can come and watch it and download it. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much.
Jared, thank you so much. I'm going to do a quick thank you to you guys and to our audience. Erika, Claire, Jared, thank you, thank you. We've got a number of questions that have continued to come in, so I do just want to say to anyone that if we didn't get to your questions, someone will follow up with you. As Jared said, be sure you download all those resources. You can complete the short survey. You can also ask any last questions you may have in the survey. There's an open-ended response box. And finally, as a reminder, you will receive a link to this presentation for on-demand viewing and to share with members of your team who you think would find this conversation of interest. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to hosting you at our next event. Have a great day, everyone. Oh.